Oh yeah, my name is Daniel, and I come from Sydney, Australia at the moment. I'm the founder of the project Tensorium. Tomorrow you should stay for my talk because it's the most interesting project in blockchain technologies ever that you will hear about. And also I'm the founder of bitfwd, as Archana mentioned, which is an open source community of developers, entrepreneurs, academics that do good stuff. You can go online and see our weird stuff. My background is I was an engineer in the semiconductor industry. Also a researcher on quantum computation, which is what brought me to Australia, which has very good research base there. And in the last couple of years, I was working in the banking and finance sector, also in Australia and Southeast Asia. So jumping into the topic. We're discussing a lot of financial use cases with blockchain. And just to kind of get the context of why are we even looking at finance with this industry. So what is an economy? By Wikipedia, it's an area where you have trade activities, distribution, consumptions of goods and services. And it dates back to the early civilization of Mesopotamia, I think it's called, that area in Persia. And then, as technologists, we like to think in stacks. So the next step in the stack was, how do we interface to an economy? So we have rules, and we have money. So the first money that was invented was called the shekels, which is a piece of metal, usually a precious metal. And funny thing is, because it was invented in this area, Mesopotamia, by biblical time, this is actually the same name of the currency in Israel today, which is where I come from. So we still use shekels for thousands of years, right? Did not develop much. And that's how we're interfacing and doing all kinds of economic activities as a society. Now, after we introduce rules and currency, what's happening next? So what's happening is that we can start seeing the formation of social structure, then venture capitals, banks, global trade with Marco Polo and those guys that started touring the world and establishing those connections, and even stock exchanges. So stock exchanges date really, really back. Now that we established kind of the framework, I want to talk about disruptions to this framework. So one massive disruption that we're all taught through our schooling years is the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution basically came and reshuffled how society is structured through extremely boosted productivity, but it also came with a price, which is economic, environmental impact and complete inequality, right? So every such disruption, by the very word disruption, disrupts things. Next thing, being technologist, computing. The next major revolution was the invention of computing. The guy that invented what we call today a computer is Alan Turing, which was at the time working for the British Secret Services, hired by them during the Second World War. And basically they had the challenge of decrypting secret German messages that were communicating through their allies, and basically that at the time they had the Enigma machine. No one was able to crack it. What Turing did was he proposed, I don't want just to crack the Enigma. I want to build this machine that has general purpose capability to run any executable code on it. And at the time, it was a concept that was completely foreign to his employers, that if you watch that movie, The Imitation Game, I highly recommend it, then you will see that there was some major dramas in funding this project that no one was even able to understand what's the value, right? And there are two key points that I want you to kind of take and keep in the back of your mind before we move forward. One is that when Turing invented it, the major kind of fundamental breakthrough there was that it's a general purpose machine. So it can basically, like theoretically, it can run any piece of software code on it, right, or any algorithm. And the second thing is, an outcome of the fact that it's general purpose is that even Turing himself, which is the inventor of the computer, didn't know what is the impact and the potential of this machine, because like you can't even imagine what you don't know. You just know that it's general purpose. So with that in mind, the next disruption, the internet, jumping a little bit forward. So the internet, let's like look at when the internet actually went into every person's household, or at least developed countries enjoyed it first. It provided us digital lifestyle and completely changed how information is exchanged. Now, talking a little bit about what was the first experience of the internet. At the time it was introduced, it was very, very emerging, and like there wasn't so much structure. So for me as a school kid, I was running out of class, going to the computer lab, and chatting to people from all over the world, just random chat, right? So hello to all, dear, nice people, whatever. Talking to people from all over the world was very, like, sensational. The other thing that happened in the 1996, there was the leakage of that video by Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee. So I intended to show you the trailer of Alan Turing, but the video doesn't play. This video you'll have to watch by yourself. And reason I'm showing those two examples is that the concept of internet was already there, but there wasn't any structure, right? What those examples showed was the potential to actually commercialize, or at least have something that is oriented to consumers. So this was a very disruptive new force that came. So basically, to kind of illustrate it from high-level network architecture, in the 90s, what we had was a very emerging, free, and unstructured network. That was the internet. And obviously, it's cool that it's emerging, but then unstructured means that people can be very skeptical as to what is the potential, right? Like, I have a friend who was working for KPMG in the end of the 90s, and he says that all the serious people with the suits were like meeting, and like at the time, e-commerce was like, wow, e-commerce is going to happen and stuff. And those guys that were like working for consulting firms were saying, nah, like no one would put their credit cards online, right? And now in hindsight, we look at it and it's like, seriously, like you are that naive, right? So yeah, and obviously we had to use ASCII and not emojis at the time. It was really early. Then moving on, what happened after this emergent and free era came some smart people in the Silicon Valley that traditionally had very fertile ground for structured methodological innovation. And they basically started structuring those services that are suitable for commercial activities. So say if it's Facebook, or now we have Alibaba in China or WeChat, those, what they do is basically give us all of the services that we need. So as a user, we're like logging on to their server, and we don't need to host any of our services. If back in the 90s we needed to host our websites or host even our emails, the barrier was really only for technical people to use, right? So those people basically commercialized it by making it accessible to everyone. And as you can see, the outcome of it is that it's highly centralized architecture. We're stripped off of our privacy. However, obviously this is the lifestyle, the digital lifestyle that we all experience today, and this is pretty much how everything is done today. Next came the first implementation of public blockchain, which was Bitcoin back in the 2009-10 in the wake of the global financial crisis. So the Bitcoin, if we just want to simplify what it actually is, so we already had torrents before, which is peer-to-peer file sharing, but then also with the inclusion of PKI, we can avoid double spending and all kind of other challenges that peer-to-peer networks present with introduction of peer-to-peer currency. Bitcoin validated really, really well the idea of a transaction network, right? So as I see it, maybe like you can judge me for that, but it's a proof of concept Bitcoin. Still very valuable proof of concept, but essentially it's a very dumb network. It just does like transacting of Bitcoins, and yes, of course we can trade and speculate and become like Bitcoin millionaires, buy Lambos and all those like memes. However, it's not really taking us further. Now, Pepe is actually a celebrity in the crypto world, so like remember this frog. Now, basically, we're all happy. We understand the concept of peer-to-peer currency network. And as we said, like what do we do after that? Great, we played, we transacted with each other. What's happening now? So then comes Ethereum. Back in 2013, this wonder kid, Vitalik, says, hey, we have this wonderful peer-to-peer network. Why don't we use a general purpose computing machine that is deployed on that network? So basically, instead of just supporting transactions, we can have a computer that exists all over the web and can run general purpose code and belongs to no one or everyone, right? So this is a completely mind-blowing new concept that was introduced by Ethereum. And those programs that run on that network, you heard that word several times today, they're called smart contracts. And Ethereum is just one implementation. There are many other networks like my colleagues demonstrated earlier. Now, often we can be cynical and say, great, we have decentralized network, general purpose, what's the killer app, right? Does any of you know what's the killer app? Anyone? Bangalore IIT Hub? Yeah, so a friend of mine says, have some imagination, bro, which reminds me a lot of what basically was coming with Turing, right? We did not know what is the killer app of a computer other than winning the Second World War, which changed a few things in the world, right? But we did not know what was the killer app. But now today, like everyone's using like Ola for cabs or like e-commerce and that, and like we take it as a given. So I'll walk you through just some of the use cases that were demonstrated since the inception of Ethereum. So one first use case that became kind of relatable to the general public that understands the internet as we already know it was the CryptoPunks. What they did is that they designed unique 10,000 avatars, 8-bit avatars, that are tokenized. And a smart contract, this program that is deployed, is basically managing the ownership and transfer and sale and bidding, all kind of those avatars. I own one. I gave a friend of mine one. At the time, it was free to claim. You would only pay the transaction fee to the network. By now, if you're going on to the CryptoPunks smart contract, it would cost you probably about 0.23 or something like that Ethereum, the native token, which is a good few tens of dollars for the cheapest one, and the more expensive ones can go thousands of dollars. So this demonstrates the power of having this completely decentralized smart contract that manages transfer of ownership of digital. By now, if you're going on to the CryptoPunks smart contract, it would cost you probably about 0.23 or something like that Ethereum, the native token, which is a good few tens of dollars for the cheapest one, and the more expensive ones can go thousands of dollars. So this demonstrates the power of having this completely decentralized smart contract that manages transfer of ownership of digital assets that are not only the currency, right? Now moving on, back last year in November, we ran the largest blockchain hackathon in Australia, the Blockathon, and the winning team from Melbourne designed something very similar to the CryptoPunks, but with cats. So if, just like everyone knows that the internet is designed to watch cats' videos, same goes for blockchains, right? Like it's designed for cats, clearly. And I'll talk a little bit more about cats in this presentation, so bear with me. And you may think that it's all kind of funny, but you see this cat here, it's called Princess Leia Peach Rainbow Vomit. And people were fighting about this cat in the blockathon. And all the people, developers that are millionaires, okay, they were fighting about it. So you can understand how serious this is, right? Like it can give you this experience of the power of how blockchain is so relatable. Of course, it's a subculture now, but like you can see how it's potentially going to grow. Next thing is kind of an upgrade to this, yet again, cats, which is the CryptoCats, CryptoKitties, sorry. So CryptoKitties was a winner of another blockchain hackathon back, I think, in the US or Canada. Waterloo, it was Canada. So what those guys did was basically a unique collectible cats, right? Each of them have their own algorithmic DNA. Obviously, they're non-fungible, so each cat, even though they can be worth the same in value, you can't just replace it, like I want my cat, right? And they're transferable for a fee, and they're breedable. So the internet was designed for cats and for porn. So you see another factor that takes it another level and basically gets much more engagement because people can own 2 cats and then breed them and get another cat, which is algorithmically, their DNA algorithmically is designed and produces a whole new unique cat. Now, okay, I guess that probably you kind of feel like we should move on from talking about cats. Well, I'll do my best to like switch to slightly more serious stuff. But before that, just to give you the kind of gist of how much money was involved in those cats. So when they launched it, I think it was around October, I'm not so sure. And this presentation, I showed this use case in another 1.21 conference in Sydney. And at the time, back in December, the turnover that the CryptoKitties had was $12 million worth of ETH. Since then, you're already talking about many dozens of $1 million, right? So it's kind of blowing your mind when you think that some random cat's dApp suddenly is probably worth more in turnover than many of the apps that we all know and use and think that they're very, very serious, right? So you can grasp the impact that this has. Another use case. So Pirate Bay. Have you heard of Pirate Bay? It's a site you can download torrents from. So like for those of you who are downloading torrents, I'm assuming no one here, of course. But one thing that those guys did was that whenever a user would log on to their website, the website would hijack some of the CPU to mine Monero. Monero is another cryptocurrency. And it's entertaining, it's like cool or uncool, depending how you think about it. But what it demonstrates is that if we were traditionally thinking about business models that are only about taking your personal data and somehow packaging it and selling it on, which is what the Silicon Valley culture kind of brainwashed that this is the only business model that exists nowadays, suddenly you see that with distributed networks and cryptocurrency, you're opening to a completely different like vertical of business model, right? You're monetizing traffic in a completely different way. So, yeah. Now, real world use case. To the left side of the screen, you see the car that I bought in 2012 in Israel. I was a master's student at the time, and I bought it with shekel. So I went to the bank, got a banknote, stood in line, went to transfer it, stood in line in the office, etc. Used the same old shekel. The token that was invented thousands of years ago still is in use today, right? And this was a process that was time-consuming and transaction fees were not negligible. Next is you see the car that I bought in Sydney just recently. I paid in ETH, so the Ethereum native currency. I did transfer of ownership online, and the transaction fee was much lower. So while this is a very, not everyone would go and buy their cars with ETH. I'm not expecting you to be going through this. it shows you how suddenly the payment provider, which is major retail banks, was completely cut out of this transaction, right? And this is already possible today. Maybe not on a massive scale because of transaction throughput, but this is a different topic that we'll discuss tomorrow. All right, another use case. So my wife is Chinese, and if you see here to the left again, you see the local tax bureau of the hometown of my wife in Zhongshan, China. And if you're thinking about tax collectors, right? The way tax collectors operate, it's extremely, extremely passive. Basically, they kind of stand on junctions and collect our fees without actually doing so much more. It's a very passive function. Add to that, it's a centralized authority that basically dictates what would be the schemes through which things are handled. Another thing is there's no one to really regulate them because they're part of the system, right? So who is there to decide that they're actually acting on our best interest? That building is the nicest building in the town, and lucky for me that my family in China are tax people, so I can enjoy this nice of neighborhood. But what about the rest of the society that wants the taxpayer, like the taxes that are collected, to be handled properly? One proposal that is discussed in the crypto community is why not be somewhat more proactive and have the taxes collected through establishment of mining farms, because mining farms are already collecting tax through the transaction fee. So obviously it's a kind of a naive use case, and you can already go with the intellectual discussion of having smart contracts to actually manage taxes. So you can do a more sophisticated use case. But it gives you this, this kind of insight into how the world can look like if we're dealing with completely decentralized technologies, and how an actor, which is a governmental actor, right, can be much more proactive. And by the nature of the fact that the network itself belongs to the public, so those actors would have to be much more self-regulatory, right? Because they would have to adapt to changes that are happening in the society and the technology and build their systems accordingly. Yeah, this is a tweet that I just saw the other day before I presented this in Mumbai. And Xi Zhaoyang, which is the creator of Farmville, it's like a very successful game, and he's also an AI expert and crypto investor. He was discussing how a lot of engineering talent and entrepreneurs are moving away from Silicon Valley to other locations, whether it's outside of the US or just different cities that traditionally were slightly less innovative. And the last remark is Silicon Valley is being unbundled. So the way I see it is that decentralized technologies are basically decentralizing technology hubs, right? Don't worry, Bangalore will still be fine. But the thing is that it empowers us to be anywhere in the world, because in the blockchain world, you need to think global from day one. There is no such thing as like, all right, let me think about some public network, blockchain, DApp, or whatever that applies to my hometown. I can do it, and it would be like a nice charity case or whatever. And it's important. But then as an entrepreneur, that you think, okay, what is the thing that I can do that is going to make an impact and empower people globally? You're thinking about, how do I think of those designs and systems? So this is a beautiful tool to have, because it suddenly takes you to a whole other level than where we were with just the internet. Suddenly the internet that is so, used to be so groundbreaking feels like archaic. And yeah, again, a point about money. So if we were thinking about money as those traditional banknotes or the shekels that are thousands of years used in this region, suddenly money is a completely different thing. We don't think about money just as a Bitcoin transaction or something. We can program money, right? So it's programmable money. Suddenly it's about value exchange and different ways of doing things with this value. So the whole concept of what is money is disrupted, right? Like money is the one thing that kind of is an invisible hand that connects everyone, connects all the society through different things. Suddenly, when you can program it with blockchains, that's completely mind-blowing, like a general purpose machine that can give you different value exchange models. And then, just before I finish, there is this meme that we put on our blockathon. Often in this crypto space, people are obviously in it for the flip and they want to have their Lambos and become millionaires. But then there's Neo that asks Morpheus, do you think one day my Bitcoin is going to be worth millions of dollars? So that if you really kind of internalize the beauty and the promise of these technologies, one day you won't even have to sell it for fiat, because fiat is basically not really relevant anymore. You would only think in decentralized concepts. I think, let's see. Yeah, if you want to follow me for more content on social media, so follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we also have Tenzorum and Bitfor that you can get a lot of our content. We have, like, all of the content that we have is open sourced. It's free. We have a tutorial that is how to issue a token. Just a few days ago launched how to launch your own ICO. Right now our tutorial for how to issue a token ranks #1 on Google with $0 marketing. Gets many hits a day. We make it very accessible and very easy to use even for people that are non-technical. It's very important for us that things are easily understood. So please feel free to get in touch through our online resources. And namaste.